Guys, it's my prayer that every time we get together, I will tell you, I will do my due diligence. I will do my work to preach the Bible as clearly and as well as I can. And that I will put in the time to pray, that God would use it to speak to you and to teach you and to grow you. But I want you guys to know that it ultimately, you all have to listen. You all have to seek to learn and to grow and to listen to the Spirit as He communicates the truth to you. And that's what I always want you guys to think about, all right? Because, like, you know, the Word of God is ultimately the purpose of gathering together, all right? It's the idea that we will worship Him, but we also are worshiping as we study His Word and apply it to our lives, all right? And so right now we're studying real people, real talk. It's the idea that there are people in the Bible that we thought were heroes, and we're taking a real look at their life, and we're going to really talk about them and who they were, and we're going to see that they weren't much different than us. And the idea behind this is that we often feel like we're not good enough, like we, you know, God can't use us because we've messed up too much, or things like that. And I feel that way in my life. But ultimately, what it comes down to is we're not good enough, and neither was Abraham, neither was Isaac, neither was Jacob, neither was Moses, neither were any of the Israelites or any person that God's ever used. Nobody's been worthy of that. But God uses people who are messed up just like us. And He wants to use you. And He wants to in your life, and then He wants to do a work through your life. And so what I'm looking at is that, and today we're going to look at Moses. We're going to see a point to where Moses forgets the why of ministry, the why of serving, okay, and why, W-H-Y, all right? Because here's the thing, when it comes to serving people, we don't always want to do that. We need to, when I'm trying to communicate that people need to come and serve, if I just tell you the what, so like here's what we're going to do, guys. If I tell you the where, here's where we're going to be. And I tell you even who, like here's who we're going to help. That's not enough, because what really sells when it comes to serving is the why. Like these adults that are up here right now, they're not here because we meet in this cool building, the where. They're not here because, they're not here ultimately because any one of you is going to be here. Sorry, Sean, they don't care if it's just you, all right? They're not here because of what they're going to do, because most of what they're going to do is ultimately going to get crazy, and it's going to take time. They don't care about those things. They're here because of the why. And the why for them serving is because they love you all and they want to see you grow in your faith. Right? But ultimately, they love you even if you don't grow in your faith. And so when I look at my why in my life, there have been times in my life I have forgotten the why of my ministry. And if I'm being shooting straight with you all, last year, I've been here for over a year, last year was one of the toughest times that I've doubted my why. It was a hard year. I talked to you all about my depression and that I was dealing with, things that I was struggling with. It was a tough year. And I am just now kind of coming out of that time where I was doubting my why. But what it comes down to is this: when I'm doubting why I serve, I'm usually focused on self. I'm looking inward. And when I'm doubting why I serve, I'm usually looking at success and whether I have it or whether I don't. And so that's where I'm coming from. But here's why it's so hard. Here's the reason it's so hard to lose the why of service. It's easy to lose the why of service because our world says for you to serve someone else, you need to see what you can get. It says to look at whether you're going to receive praise for what you do. It says to see if you're going to feel good after you do it, after you serve someone else. Or maybe it's for community service hours, right, to go to college. I'll tell you, if you're serving just for community service hours, that's like tithing to your church, like giving your money to the church just for the tax write-off. That's stupid. Because I can tell you, there's probably more fun ways to serve than to serve the way God wants us to. So if you're just looking for community service hours, I can find you a better way to do that. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't get them if you're going to serve. But what I'm saying is, because trust me, I take my tax write-off for my giving. But that's not why I give. We always have to remember the why, and the why is important. But our world says, find what you can get for it. Some people serve because they think they're making up for sins they've committed. I'll tell you, that will never work. Because your serving will never pay the price for your sin. It won't cover it. But we're going to see what God has to do right here. What God says about service and about the why. And we're going to see Moses at a time in his life where he forgets why he is leading the people of Israel, why he's serving them. Because leading is really serving. If you're a leader, you're a servant. Real leaders do the job no one else wants to do. So here's the background here. As we look at Numbers chapter 20, all right, we see this is happening like right before the story that we studied last week, where Phinehas kills the two people and God honors him for being jealous for the jealousy of God. Right? Because he wants Israel's worship to be focused solely on God and not on Baal. And so he kills those two people, and God honors him for for being that way towards God's righteousness. And so that's just before that. It's just before the nation of Israel is going to enter the promised land. It's just before they go to Jericho, right? If you remember the childhood story or the VeggieTale movie, they march around Jericho and the walls come tumbling down. All right? It's right before that. And it's right after they've wandered around in the wilderness for 40 years. In fact, they're in this place called Kadesh Barnea, and it is the exact same place that they were camped when they were sent into the wilderness. So their wilderness wandering begins and ends in Kadesh. So they're right back where they started. This is right after, this is not long after they left Egypt under Moses, about 40 years after that. They've been in Egypt for like 215 years. God takes them out, and they're not obedient, and they wander around, and then they come back, and they're still not obedient. But here, we're going to see Israel in Numbers chapter 20. And I want to share with you all one of my pet peeves. First off, who's got a pet peeve that might be a little wild, a little crazy? Come on. Lily, what's your pet peeve? Boom. Hate it. Also, when I'm cuddling Melody, I like being the little spoon. Yes. You feel safe! John.
People wear those pockets on their shirts. I really
Okay, he hates that. All right. Okay, let me tell y'all. Here's one of my peeves, all right? I can't stand whining. John.
I just know how it is.
I know. Hey. Here, I can't stand whining, all right? And my children whine, all right? My son gets whooped every day for whining. Every day. Yeah. And then, my daughter has even started it, right? She's 2. She can barely talk. She whines. I can't stand, no, I can't say that. One of the things that I dislike sometimes about other people's kids is they don't punish whining as hard as I do. And so their kids whine more than mine. And I'm like, hey, I don't want to watch your kids. So I'm not a children's pastor. That, and I would tell stories like, if you don't honor your elders, you're going to get eaten by bears, because that's out of the Bible. They made fun of Elijah because he was bald, and bears came out of the wilderness and ate the children. That's an awesome story. Tell that to a 2-year-old and see if they grew up entitled. You know what I mean? But here's the deal, all right? I was one of the worst whiners. How many of you all have a friend who's a whiner? Who's got that friend, right? Okay, everybody that doesn't have your hand up, okay, put your hands down. If you didn't put your hand up, you're the whiner. You are. Because here's the deal. My friends, Hey, listen, my friends and I, we'd go golfing, and like the first time it got cold, I'm like, hey guys, I'm going home. That's it. This is stupid. I don't need to be out here. In fact, your youth leaders right here have heard me say, this is stupid like 9 million times, because I whine. I'm a whiner. And, like, I was the friend that would like complain if the conditions weren't just right. That's why I hate being outside. Bugs, cold, stupid. Might sweat. Yeah. Zane, we're heart, soul brothers. Melody says soul sisters, but that was weird for us. We're soul brothers. Right? All right, so hear me out. Hear me out. All right. Guys, Israel is one of the biggest whining, like groups of whiners in the world. Ever to exist was the nation of Israel. All right? And so point number one tonight, if you're going to grab onto something, the first thing to hold on to is this idea of fussing or whining. All right? And we're going to read verses 2 through 5 out of Numbers chapter 20. It says, there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves against Moses and Aaron. The people thus contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why then have you brought the Lord's assembly into the wilderness for us and our beasts to die here? Why have you made us come up from Egypt to bring us in this wretched place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there water to drink. So, I don't know if you guys catch some of that, right? If you read the Bible and you focus to learn and to see what's actually said, like, they come to a place, right, Kadesh, there's no water there for them, and so they're all, like, freaking out, okay? They're like, God, why did you bring us here to die? We'd rather be dead than be dying. Like, how stupid is that, okay? Whining is stupid, right? It always is. And so, like, we'd rather be dead than be dying. And then they say this. Then they say, we'd rather be in Egypt. Guys, they just were taken from Egypt because for 215 years, they had cried out to God saying, God, help us from this situation. They were treated like less than humans, all right? Their children were slaughtered to keep the numbers down so that Israel didn't overtake the Egyptians. And they're saying, we'd rather be in Egypt than in this desert thirsty. That's what they just said. And then they said, God, you told us there was going to be like this land of milk and honey with pomegranates and figs and vines. There's none of that here, God. You're not in the promised land yet. What did you expect? You could have been there 40 years earlier if you would have been faithful. But they're telling God, hey, this promised land that you told us of, it's not as good as you said. You're a liar. They're complainers, they're fussing, they're whining. How many times do we complain and whine when things aren't going just the way we want? All the time. I do. Ask my wife. All the time. And so Israel here is saying, God, there's no water to drink. And we see them rebel. Because in verse 5 it says that they assembled themselves against Moses and Aaron. That word assembled themselves, when you look at the Hebrew guys, I'm not going to bore you with that. But it means they rioted against their leaders. It was like mutiny on a pirate ship. They were like, Moses and Aaron, figure this out or we're going to kill you. That's what's going down. So not only are they complaining, but they are rebelling against God and against his leaders that he had established over them. And so we see this complaining and griping when things don't go their way, and we're no better. But guys, when we complain and we gripe to God, what are we really communicating? We're communicating that we don't think God cares about our trouble. We're communicating that we don't believe he's going to take care of us. That's what we're really saying. We're saying, God, this isn't as good as you said it was going to be, and I don't think you're going to do anything about it. I dare you to. That's what they did. But here's the answer for complaining and griping, all right? The answer is to remember what God has already done in your lives. Remember what he's already done in your lives. We see Israel, right? And they're going through the desert for 40 years, right? And they're like, hey, God, we're hungry. Give us something to eat, right? So God literally rains down bread every morning. And that's what they had to live on, and they're eating this delicious bread. They describe it as a sweet taste. And they're eating this awesome, like, Hawaiian bread. That's my favorite type of roll, right? Hawaiian rolls. They're eating this awesome bread from heaven called manna. And they say, God, hey, we're sick of this manna. This awesome bread is getting old. Like, you've been providing for us in the desert with food, and we're only here because of our lack of faithfulness. Give us something else. And so God sends quail. And they kill the quail. They eat the meat, right? Thank goodness. But they whine. They complain the whole time. But God constantly provides. So then they're like, God, we're at a place now. There's no water. This is actually before Numbers chapter 20. They're like, hey, there's no water, God. Come on, you want us to die here? They say that every time. We'd rather be in Egypt. And God sends Moses to hit the rock with a staff. He does. He gives them water. And then later, they're like, God, there's no water again. They come to some water, okay? They're like, this water's bitter, God. Like, we've been dying of thirst. We're not going to drink this. It's bitter. Right? Yeah. It's like me saying, God, I'm broke. I lost my job. I got no coat. Somebody walks up and hands me a coat. I'm like, that's a Carhartt, dude. I'm not wearing that. You know? Like, that's what it's saying. Like, you're freezing to death, and you're like, no, I don't want that coat. Sorry. Yeah, I'd rather freeze. But you got to understand, here, you know what God did? God said, Moses, pick up that piece of wood, throw it in the water. And he took the bitterness out of the water. Because God provides. Even in our stupidity. Because he's faithful and he loves us. And so God is doing these things for Israel. And if only they get to this point in Numbers 20, if only they would remember what God has already done. And we're going to see him provide for them again, even when they're complaining. But the answer to complaining that you need to think of is this, is how has God worked in your life already? Or maybe in the lives of your friends that you can look on and be like, he'll do that for me too. When life's hard, when it's not good, when you're like, hey, I don't know where my next meal's going to come from. My dad lost his job. I'll tell you, God provides. I've been heard to say this, all right? And Candace knows I've said it. I'm sure Mike's heard me say it. But I've always said, ministry sure would be easy if it wasn't for people. All right? Okay? Like, serving people would be easy if it weren't for people. How stupid is that, right? Because you can't serve or minister without people. But man, it would be easy if it wasn't for people. Because hear me, like, for instance, in Harrison, right? I had 4 dudes come up to me when they were 8th graders and said, hey, Seth, we want you to disciple us. I'm like, all right, guys, when can you guys meet? They're like, let's meet on Mondays at 8 o'clock or at 6 o'clock for breakfast at McDonald's. I was like, dude, if I'm getting out of bed at 6 o'clock on a Monday, you better be there. And they were. And I met with those guys for 4.5 years. But let me tell you something. I poured myself into them. I invested in them. But by their senior year, let me tell you, it broke my heart. Because one of those kids doesn't even act like he can. One of them just kind of fell off the face of the map for baseball. Because he wanted to pursue this dream of playing college baseball when he wasn't good enough to do it. And another one fell off the face of the map because he got a job. And another one fell off the face of the map because he got involved with another ministry. And what am I left holding, right? What do I see in return for my investment? Nothing. And I'm just telling you all, my attitude was all wrong. But you can see why ministering with people is hard. And why we often get fed up with people. And I mean, I'll tell you, if any of you are like, hey, Seth, I want you to pour into my life, like, I'll do it. But I'm not going to approach you because if you don't have the drive to do it, then I'm not going to waste my time. That's how they got me to do it. But I'm also going to tell you that I've been burned once, and I know I need to serve anyway, but I'm a work in progress. I'm not sanctified yet. I learned that as I was talking to a buddy of mine today, and I was telling him a story, and he's like, dude, you can't say that, because I said, ask him. I told him the David Platt story about how I asked David Platt how he wipes, and he's like, you did that? I'm like, yeah, I'm not sanctified yet. Apparently holy people don't talk about poop. Apparently they don't. I didn't know that. I didn't know Jesus, I didn't know that was the 12th commandment. Cleanliness is the 11th. But, I mean, I'm not perfect. I'm still struggling. I'm still bitter over those 4 guys. But we see Moses here in this passage. He's going to get fed up with the people that he's been serving. So let's dive in, verses 6 through 11. It says, Then Moses and Aaron came in from the presence of the assembly to the doorway of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. All right, that's a good start, right? We're going to pray. Like, Israel's come to us, they're rioting. Let's pray. Good start, Moses and Aaron, right? On point. Great job. Then the glory of the... I know what she's thinking. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to them, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Take the rod, and you and your brother Aaron assemble the congregation, and speak to the rock before their eyes, that it may yield its water. You shall thus bring forth water for them out of the rock, and let the congregation and their beasts drink. So Moses took the rod from before the Lord, just as he had commanded him, and Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock. And he said to them, Listen now, you rebels, shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came forth abundantly, and the congregation and their beasts drank. So what we see here is God meets with Moses. Moses and Aaron pray, right? Great start. Good job, right? And it says that God's presence meets them there. And I've always been the one to tell you all that if you enter the presence of God, you want to stay there. You always want to be there. And it leads to obedience. But man, I look at this passage and I'm like, hey, they didn't obey after being in the presence of God. And I don't understand that. But hey, we all, we're not perfect. And no matter how close you are to God, right, them in his presence, literally right there, they're still going to be messed up and disobey. And so God tells Moses and Aaron, he says, guys, Moses, gather the people, take the rod, right, his staff that God, that he had with him at the burning bush, that God said, hey, throw it on the ground, it became a snake, pick it up, it's not a snake. Like, wow, all sorts of cool stuff is done with that staff. And God says, take that staff with you. He says, assemble the people, and then I want you to talk to the rock. And when you speak to it, water will come out so the people can drink. But what does Moses do? He disobeys because he's angry. And what he does is he takes that rod, and the rod's important, the staff's important, because it was a sign of Moses' authority and of God's blessing on Moses' ministry. That's what it was about. And so he takes the rod, which he's supposed to show it to the people to be like, hey, I have the right to speak to you. Thus says the Lord, basically. This is what God said. But instead, he doesn't show them the rod. He speaks to the people. But God had said, speak to the rock. And instead of speaking to the rock, and instead of showing the rod to the people and speaking to the rock, he speaks to the people and he hits the rock with the rod. That's disobedience, guys. He didn't do what God had told him to do. And he's going to pay dearly for it, as we're going to see. But he did not do what God told him to do. And it's because he's angry with those people. How do we know that? Verse 10. Listen to what he says. And the author here of Numbers clearly captures the tone that Moses uses. He says, listen now, you rebels. Shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Because Moses is angry with these people who complain and complain and complain and don't trust God to provide. He's always provided. He gave them water. He gave them food. They didn't like the water. He gave them better water, He's always provided, and they don't trust him. So Moses is fed up, and he's mad. But he calls them rebels. And they are rebels. Look at them like they're rioting over a lack of water. And so they are rebels, but the truth is when Moses disobeys God, he joins the rebellion. And he's no better. He clearly has gotten sick of the people that he's been serving. So he hits the rock, and water comes out. Moses was fed up. How often do you maybe get fed up with people that you try to invest in, that you try to pour your life into? Some of you students, you know what I'm talking about. Most of you adults know what I'm talking about. But like for me, like I know. Those boys, that's my situation right here. I invested in them, I poured into them, and they rebelled, and I'm sick of it. Honestly, sometimes some of you all, I see that same thing. And I'm like, man, am I wasting my time? You see the low point I've been in. But you know what? Guilt's a horrible motivator, so don't walk away feeling guilty because you're not going to do it because of guilt. I promise you. It doesn't work that way. Guilt's not a good motivator. Telling the why, that's a good motivator. But let me tell you, here, I know what it feels like to get fed up with people that you serve. How many of you all have had a friend you've tried to pour your life into, and they've either stabbed you in the back or just drifted away from you? You know what it feels like. Moses had forgotten. Here's what he forgot, okay? He forgot his why. He forgot why he served those people, and he served them because that was his people that he loved. That was the people that he loved. In Egypt, what did Moses do? He killed this Egyptian man for beating. Now, I'm not telling you that's right, but he killed this Egyptian man for beating an Israelite because those were his brothers and sisters. And he loved them. He did not want to see them beat. And what did he do when he went back to get the people of Israel and take them out? He said, I'm not Pharaoh, the daughter of Pharaoh's, I'm not the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He said, that's not who I'm going to claim to be. He was the son of Pharaoh's daughter. But he said, I'm not going to be that. I'm going to claim my Israelite heritage. And that's what he did because he loved the Israelite people. It's not that he doesn't love them here. He just forgot that that's why he serves. It's why he puts up with their complaining and their griping, their riots. I've yet to face a riot, but I was pretty close one time when we had this thing called a worship fury when I was in Harrison. It was this idea where we played some loud music and everybody started kicking over chairs, and I was like, whoa, I'm going to lose control of this real quick. Nobody smashed the guitar, thankfully, but it was close. That's what Moses had to put up with. And so when we face those moments where we're like, God, I'm sick of these people. When I face those moments, we have to remember why we serve. What's your why? And I'll tell you what our whys are. It's because we love God. And because we love those people that we're serving. I'll tell you, I'm a Cubs fan. Cubbies, right? This is my year. Last year was my year, right? But I want you to know, I've been a Cubs fan since I was 6. So you're talking like 23 years of cheering for a losing team. Now, I mean, I'm telling you, I've been faithful. I've loved my Cubbies. I've cheered for my Cubbies. I've watched games every year for my Cubbies. But my faithfulness has limits. And what I mean is, there were times where it wavered and I was like, man, it would be nice to be a Cardinal fan. There were times I felt that way. There were times I was like, God, you better do something with these Cubbies, or I'm going to move on. But they made it up this year, man. World Series. There we go. You know? But the point is that I was faithful, and so point number 1 is fussing. Number 2 is fed up. But the third thing to take away is faithful. And more faithful than I ever have been to the Cubbies is our God to his children. And you're like, hey, Seth, last week, the last point was like covenant, unending covenant, which is the same idea as faithfulness. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's like the whole Old Testament. Israel's unfaithful and God's faithful. All right? Can't get away from that point. And so we read verses 11 through 13. Follow with me. It says, Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came forth abundantly, and the congregation and their beasts drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, Because you have not believed me, to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. Those were the waters of Meribah, because the sons of Israel contended with the Lord, and he proved himself holy among them. So we see God in his faithfulness. Because what? Israel's griping and complaining and rioting, and Moses is disobeying. And what does God do? He gives them water. In my flesh, guys, if I'm like, no offense, all right, everybody on this side who was like, hey, let's go to Ponca. I'm like, hey, I want to do Super Summer, right? And everybody's like, we're not doing Super Summer, Seth. We're going to Ponca, with or without you. Let's say that happened, okay? And I'm like, fine, I'm not going to Ponca. You guys have fun, right? That would be what I would want to do. But what God says is this. He's like, hey, guys, I'm going to give you water. They're rioting against him. They're unfaithful to him. They're whining and complaining, and he gives them water. Because God loves his children. And we see him punish Aaron and Moses because of their discipline, because you know what? In God's faithfulness, he is also just, and so there were consequences for their sin. But you know what? Even an act of mercy to Moses, he lets him see the promised land before he dies. He lets him see it from a distance. And then you factor in this fact that God's faithful and he's just. And we look at this, how he says that he was holy among them. It's because even when Israel was unfaithful to God, he stays faithful each and every day to Israel. And we see this idea that God is good and he loves us dearly. I told you all about it last week, Abraham's covenant with God, all right? We studied like 4 weeks ago about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and we looked at their lives and how they were unfaithful, but God was continually faithful to them. But here's the covenant that he made. God said, I will be your God, and I will provide for you and protect you and bless you. And he said, I want you to be faithful to me, and I will be your God. You will serve me, and I will be your God. That's the covenant they made. But here's what they did, all right? They took animals, they killed them and cut them in half, and God, when they made covenants back then, when they made like promises that were like stronger than a contract, two men would kill these animals, line them up, and they would walk between them holding hands, making this statement that if we break this covenant, may us be split open like these beasts. And they would walk through it side by side. That was the way a covenant was made. But what does God do with Abraham when he makes that covenant? I'll tell you what he did. God knocks Abraham unconscious and carries him through those animals in his arms. Why? Because he knew Abraham would never keep his end of the bargain. His end of the covenant would never be upheld. And we see Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all of Israel, unfaithful to God. And he knew that if he was conscious, he would be held responsible for keeping his end. But God will always keep his end. He's made a covenant. He doesn't break his promise. And so, when you look at your life and you see the covenant that God's made with you, you see that God will always be faithful to you. What you need to remember is that God is faithful and he's just. And so for our sin, there is a punishment, right? And the world doesn't want you to believe in it, but there's a place called hell where people who decide that they want to pay for their own sin by not trusting in Jesus, where they will pay for their sin. But God is faithful and just, and God in his faithfulness and his mercy sent Jesus Christ to come to earth and to die to pay the price for your sin so that you don't have to pay it. And so Jesus died paying the price for your sin and mine. And what he did was by paying for that sin, if you trust in him and what he did and you turn from your sin, you will be saved. And God is faithful to those that are his children, those that he saves. And so tonight, if you're that person that you've never trusted in Jesus and turned from your sin, if that's you, I want you to come talk to me tonight. If you feel like you want to become a Christian tonight, if you want to turn from your sin and put your trust in the fact that Jesus died for you, if that's you, I want you to talk to me tonight when we get done. But for us Christians here, listen, if you've already done that, you need to remember the why of why you're serving. You need to be serving firstly, but you need to remember why you serve. And it should be because you love God and you love people that he loves. And it should also be because he's always faithful to you through your messed up life. He's always faithful. God, we love you. We thank you for your word. We thank you for the truth in it. We thank you above all else for your faithfulness in sending Jesus to pay the price for our sin by his death so that we don't have to. God, that's faithfulness. When I was sinning, when I've ever done the